And Mary has joined us online. Good morning, Mary. Not that Mary, this Mary. This week we're looking at the virtuous factors of the Eightfold Path: right speech, right action, and right livelihood. It is by developing a measure of concentration and understanding what is to be held in mind, meaning refined mindfulness, that we're able to practice the Dhamma how it's intended. And the Dhamma is intended to be practiced at the point of contact between who we are, our senses, and the outside world. And of course, that is informed and animated by how we think. Whatever our thoughts are going to determine how we relate to ourselves and the world around us. So in thought, word, and deed, we're able to monitor and get direct feedback on what we're thinking. Because what we're thinking, what we're holding in mind, in other words, there's a relation to karma here too. Just because for years and years and years, I thought how wonderful it would be to play center field for the Yankees. I still do, but it's not likely to happen just because I'm holding it in mind. There's no super creative force to me just thinking something that is not likely to happen. What I'm talking about is fabricated views in relation to the three marks of existence. There's a lot of idle thoughts that don't necessarily affect my behavior, but we should be just as mindful of idle thoughts as we should of any thought, because an idle thought is a wasted thought. One of the most remarkable things that I found reading how the Buddha taught and what he felt was important is that he didn't waste a word anywhere. He was always mindful of what was occurring and mindful of how to present his Dhamma, always in thought, word, and deed. So as we start developing the Eightfold Path, and we develop just a measure of concentration, for most of us, for the first time in our lives, we're actually able to dispassionately look at our behavior without the need to justify it or blame others for how I feel, or the fabrications I developed. It's because the world is this way, or a politician is that way, or this happened 30 years ago. None of that, let me put it this way, that is to be recognized and abandoned as fabrications. And so really what the Buddha is teaching, to look at it just this one way, is a way of radically accepting responsibility for how we think, how we act, how we feel, moment by moment. We lose the ability, and we should be grateful for this, of blaming others. There's a transition. I'm happy to be working with a guy right now who's going through this, between literally not taking much responsibility for anything, always caught up in this view that I'm acting and feeling and thinking this way because of that person, the world is like this, et cetera, rather than recognizing that there's not much I can do about worldly causes and conditions. The Buddha described that as dukkha occurs. The more that I can accept and develop concentration at the point of contact, thought, word, and deed, the more I'm able to direct my thoughts, words, and deeds towards awakening and stop being, I guess it's not too hard of a word, and stop being held prisoner to my own ignorance. Is that clear? Mm-hmm. And so while the moral and ethical or the virtuous aspects of the Eightfold Path are what gives people reason to say, well, this is a religion, because most religions have moral and ethical components. The Buddha didn't teach morals and ethics or virtue, because if we act in immoral or unethical ways, we're going to go straight to hell and burn there forever and ever and ever. Or that compromise that I was always hoping was there for me, purgatory, where I just got to spend, a couple million years burning. It's just not what the Buddha taught. The Buddha taught that the hell that we are going to make is in our own minds and in our own life experience. And it's a direct correlation. John Lennon was right about that. Instant karma will get you. Karma is a present moment unfolding of past intentional acts moderated by the present level of mindfulness. So if my mind is well concentrated and I'm seeing things framed by the Eightfold Path, then whatever karma is ripening in this moment is going to be seen clearly as dukkha occurs, and my mind won't get distracted, and I'll continue towards awakening. So let me get to this sutta. But I should ask, is that clear where I'm going with this? Mm-hmm. So the Buddha's Dhamma is entirely practical all the time. And when we look at it this way, and in the way it's intended, we can see the great value in recognizing right and wrong thoughts, words, and deeds. The Eightfold Path is characterized as a path that has three aspects or three components. It's a training in heightened virtue, a training in heightened concentration, and a training in heightened wisdom. All three of those are necessary to develop to have a complete Eightfold Path as your practice and as your way of liberation. The subtitle, this is called the Sikkha Sutta. The subtitle is 3 trainings for liberation, but it's 3 trainings within that one framework of the Eightfold Path, the Buddha's words. Friends, there are 3 trainings that I teach. I teach training in heightened virtue. I teach training in heightened concentration. I teach training in heightened wisdom. The training in heightened virtue brings restraint in speech, actions, and livelihood. This Dhamma practitioner remains pure in their behavior at all times. Again, he's now describing to a group of people that know what the practice is. He's not teaching the Eightfold Path. In fact, next week will be the Maghavibhanga Sutta, the Buddha's analysis of the Eightfold Path. He's teaching what an authentic and well-integrated Dhamma practice looks like. The Dhamma practitioner remains pure in their behavior at all times. And again, there's nothing ambiguous about any of this, is there? And the Buddha is simply stating this is what authentic Dhamma practice looks like. I don't know why that's making noise. They train themselves following these rules of behavior and understand the danger of even the slightest variation. The rules of behavior are generally right speech, right action, right livelihood. Right speech, action, and livelihood is always harmless. It's always considerate of others in a very broad way, meaning that before I start saying anything, even if my intention is to be helpful, I need to have the presence of mind to understand if this is going to fall on deaf ears or if it's going to be useful. If I know that it's going to fall on deaf ears, it's then idle chatter, and I keep my mouth shut. One of the great teaching tools that the Buddha used throughout his teaching career was someone would ask him a question, and if the question was rooted in ignorance and would only further ignorance, often the Buddha just sat quietly. To be an example of what we should do with it, we should first begin to quiet our minds and stop incessantly seeking answers for things that don't even deserve an answer. And so that inner silence that we develop is so important. Lorna brought up a couple weeks ago about the 2 different factors of seclusion. Do you want me to continue, or do you want to explain it?
You do it.
So the first or direct aspect of establishing seclusion is on our cushions. That's a meditation practice in seclusion. But as we develop our concentration, another word, perhaps a metaphor, not really the right word, for a secluded mind is a well-concentrated mind. If you think about it that way, that my mind is well-concentrated. I'm secluded from worldly entanglements because of my own well-concentrated mind. So we establish seclusion on our cushions, but another just as significant aspect of seclusion is the ability to take that seclusion off our cushions and remain disentangled with the world while we're in the midst of the world. And it is there that we practice restraint in thought, word, and deed. That's what the Buddha is referring to. That's a wise Dhamma practitioner. Does anybody feel that that's unattainable? I'm not saying to be perfect at it, but to practice the Dhamma at the point of contact with our senses. Everybody gets that? Please say no if you don't, because I can't. Okay, good. Following those rules of behavior, this is called training in heightened virtue. The training in heightened concentration, or the training in heightened jhana, develops the concentration necessary to support refined mindfulness. This Dhamma practitioner remains secluded from sensory indulgence and unskillful qualities. They enter this, now the Buddha is just going to describe in this context, the importance of developing ever deepening levels of jhana. Remember, we went through this on, I think, 7 articles about 6 months ago about the singular importance of using meditation for the sole purpose of deepening concentration, but the importance of recognizing these ever deepening levels of concentration. They enter and remain in the first jhana, characterized by rapture and pleasure, born of seclusion, and accompanied by directed thought and evaluation. That first level of jhana is simply taking pleasure in the fact that I have withdrawn from the world for a few moments, and I'm beginning to reunite my mind and my body by being mindful of my breath. That's the first level. There's nothing magical, mystical, or unattainable about this, and we've all experienced this, correct? This first level of jhana?
Yeah.
As concentration deepens further, they enter and remain in the second jhana. Focused thoughts and insight still. Delight and pleasure born of composure and inner assurance arise, meaning that as our concentration increases a bit further, we gain an inner composure, an inner assurance, even if it's just for that moment. That's an experience of profound calm developed right here and right now through this practice. Has everybody experienced that second jhana, even if it's just for a moment? Again, nothing unattainable, nothing magical or mystical, nothing special needs to be done to achieve this extraordinary state. As concentration deepens further, they enter and remain in the third jhana. The third jhana is characterized by delight and pleasure and the perception of pleasure in the perception of pleasure and pain disappearing. Meaning now it's just a pleasant abiding. I'm not evaluating, again, just for this moment, whether I'm doing it right, whether I'm doing it wrong, whether it feels good or bad, whether I'm going to achieve nibbana in the next moment or not. It's simply that pleasant abiding without any directed thought about that. And so we've all experienced that in meditation, correct?
Yeah.
Again, nothing extraordinary about it except the practice itself is entirely extraordinary. Equanimity and refined mindfulness increases, and a peaceful mind prevails. So the Buddha's describing, I've thought about this off and on over the years, is right now, what I'm teaching today, is the Buddha is teaching here that it is in that third level of jhana that once we are able to establish that, again, even if it's just briefly, that is the establishment of ever deepening concentration. In other words, we need to flow from those first 2 jhanas into this third jhana. And every time we are able to do that, we are, according to the Buddhist teachings, we're increasing concentration. And it's interesting to note that many, many people have told me, and I think every one of you would have this same experience, even probably say this today, that it takes a certain amount of time, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, a half an hour, to actually feel like you're developing concentration. Is that true? Mm-hmm. That's referring to this third level. And so if you want and I'm a little bit cautious about this because I don't want this to seem like a goal that we should be looking for. But a good way of evaluating in a realistic way your own meditation practice is if you are reaching this third state. Another way that I would say that is giving yourself enough time to reach this third state. But the caution here is that if you're beginning meditation, it's better, again, to use short periods of meditation and build up to this until you start recognizing that this third level of jhana, the level that leads to deepening concentration, is being achieved, even if it's just for a moment or two. It's an important understanding. As concentration deepens further, they enter and remain in the fourth jhana. Mindful equanimity prevails. Greed and aversion disappear. That's really the defining characteristic of a well-concentrated mind, and it's another good benchmark. In this moment, as I'm sitting peacefully, without evaluating my experience, has greed and aversion left me? And it's enough for again, to acknowledge that in this moment, I don't want anything to be more than what it is or less than what it is. I'm simply at peace. That's a fourth level of jhana.
Is that the greed part?
Well, greed and aversion is really
how greed fits in.
Greed and aversion are really 2 sides of the same coin. Aversion is wanting something to be different than it is, in this case, less of this, the situation or person, which is really greed. It's wanting something to be more. And so, excuse me, Anthony. It's an important question too. Greed can be a loaded word, and it almost sounds like it might be too extreme, but it really describes any clinging desire that I need something to be different than it is. That's greed in any moment, whether it's I need to win the lottery this week or whatever it might be. I need you to be different, or I need to be taller, or I need to be done with this cold, or whatever. It's a whole long list. I got to get a new car this year. I'm not going to be happy. Whatever that might be that we're holding out in front of ourselves as distraction, rooted in ignorance of the way things truly are, is what we're talking about here. And so as we deepen our jhana, we're able to recognize those simple and ordinary thought patterns. Why? To recognize the conceit in them and put them aside. Mm-hmm. So it's really, and so I bet if you, pure speculation, and I'm not given to this often, but I think if you asked me, when I first started meditating, if I was a greedy person, I would say, no way. In fact, I would probably say, I'm one of the most giving people I know, which might take away from that a little bit. I used to tell this friend of mine, I said, I'm one of the most humble people I've ever met. But I believed it because I didn't have any perspective. But as I started looking at my own greedy behavior, I realized that I was like every other human being. Despite the way I thought of how wonderful I was a very greedy person. And up until that point, most of my life, even though I didn't hurt people and I didn't steal or anything like that, up until that point, I really wasn't a very giving person. I thought I was. And I did nice things, hold the door for ladies, et cetera, help my parents out, help my family, help people out. But underneath, there was always an aspect of me that I was trying to take care of, that I was always trying to promote in every situation in life. And it was when I started looking at that behavior, not so much my gross behavior, not so much as I better stop robbing banks because I'm going to get caught. I never did that. It was noticing, it was developing a measure of concentration so that and the proper framework so that I could start noticing my subtle behavior that was just me. In other words, it was just my story, nothing remarkable, no reason to even look at it. But it was that very subtle behavior that was hiding me from me. Hmm. And it wasn't until I got to it. If it wasn't until I was able to develop a Dhamma practice that supported looking at that directly that I was able to make any real changes at all. So again, you hear me say this often, it's not just meditation. This is a good example of why. Because I know many meditators, including myself. I meditated for many, many years, hours and hours and hours and hours of meditation without really changing one thing about myself. Because I didn't have the framework to recognize that there was something that I needed to change. And so I spent many years in a Buddhist practice that should be teaching me to recognize and abandon all forms of craving and grasping, continuing to grasp, and even that it was presented. Often modern Buddhism is presented like modern religion, that you just act really nice for a lot of years, and if you're lucky, you'll get your reward when you die. And I did that for many years, but it didn't do much for me. It wasn't until again, excuse the long speech, but it wasn't until I started looking directly at my own behavior that the Dhamma made any sense and made any practical sense. And that's, again, I hope I'm making the point. The Dhamma is about recognizing and abandoning behavior that is rooted in ignorance. In essence, that's really it. And we recognize, and I'll conclude this little part by saying this, we can recognize the level of concentration and refined mindfulness we've developed by simply looking at our thoughts, words, and deeds. In meditation, but also be mindful off our cushions, how we're acting. If we've truly established seclusion off our cushion, or if we're still entangled in the world and we're lacking seclusion. That's clear, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Greed and referring to the fourth jhana, greed and aversion disappear. This is the development of concentration that brings peace and calm here and now. also the Buddha's description of an awakened human being. Peace and calm here and now. It's lasting. The training in heightened wisdom brings the ending of greed, aversion, and deluded thinking. Through the ending of these defilements, the wise Dhamma practitioner remains in the defilement-free release from ignorance. It's a guarantee, the Buddha. In the introduction, I talk about the great compassion that the Buddha shows in many of these suttas, including this one. He just cares for people to wake up, and this is a good example of it. If you do this, and anybody can do it, notice he doesn't put a qualification on any of these things. You need to be doing this for 20 years. You need to come from the right family, which was common in northern India at the time. All you have to do is do this, and this is what you can expect. The ending of the defilements, and we remain in the defilement-free release from ignorance. That's the whole point.
What is a defilement?
The three defilements often referred to are greed, aversion, and deluded thinking, which are really kind of one thing, aren't they? Just with three different descriptors for it. The Buddha continues, the wise Dhamma practitioner has established profound wisdom, fully mindful moment by moment as life occurs. This is called heightened wisdom. How do we know what heightened wisdom is? It's to be fully mindful moment by moment as life occurs. But there's a level of profound wisdom in even pointing that direction out, isn't it? Don't we all really want to be in our life as a life occurs? Isn't that the real problem? Isn't that why we compulsively grasp at behavior that is likely to lead to something extreme simply to get our attention so we feel alive? Think of bungee jumping or that kind of thing. And I'm not putting it down. It's it's fun to do. But we do a lot of things simply to distract ourselves into thinking that we're living our life, but we're really just entertaining ourselves. Is that clear?
Mm-hmm. That's a fine line, John.
It is.
That is a fine line.
Yeah, and it certainly doesn't mean that we shouldn't do things that are enjoyable. In fact, it means just the opposite. But it means we should do things from a well-concentrated mind, supporting that refined mindfulness so that no matter what I'm engaged in, there's no I-making in there. Because if there's I-making, there's desire. If there's like the Loka Sutta, if there's desire, there's fear, because there's fear of not getting what you want, whether you recognize it, and it leads to all kinds of stress and suffering. So, and I've said this a few times too, it would be very difficult to tell from the outside an awakened human being from one who isn't, because they're going to be living their life like everyone else. They're not going to be floating around. They might have a smile on their face, or maybe just a quiet little cheese-eating grin, like people have accused me. Why are you smiling? My poor ex-wife, she used to ask me, why are you smiling all the time? I don't know, I'm just happy. But I can understand how that would be annoying to people. The extraordinary nature of the Buddha's Dhamma, and this is maybe the reason why I say it, is because of its remarkable practical application. Every aspect of it is about living my life as fully mindful, as fully engaged in my life as I possibly can be without being distracted by my own desire. Imagine doing that. Well, that's what the Buddha teaches. And then no matter what's occurring in our life is as meaningful as it can possibly be, no matter what it is, simply because we're there for it. The great reward in life is not what we achieve. It's living our life. It's being in our lives so that we can actually live it. All the rest of it is just kind of stage fodder, isn't it? And it's just common occurrences. But to understand, as the Buddha teaches, this third factor, this great wisdom, we'll talk a little more about this. No, we won't. Well, I'll probably talk more about it next week. This great wisdom that we all develop is wisdom about how to live in the world. Why do we need it? How do we know we need it? Well, because an awakened human being awakened and said, you know what the problem is? Human beings are ignorant of Four Noble Truths. And so he taught a way to develop that understanding. And the path that he taught is this simple and direct Eightfold Path. Let me finish this. just to finish the sutta. These are the 3 trainings of my Dhamma. The trainings in heightened virtue, concentration, and wisdom establish persistence, steadfastness, absorption in jhana, refined mindfulness, and wise restraint. Does anybody feel they can't develop these 5 things? Patience, steadfastness, absorption in jhana, refined mindfulness, wise restraint?
Still working on that one.
Well, that's why it's a practice. And that's why, there's that whole series of talks we went through on restraint too, the wisdom of restraint, because it's at that point of contact that we practice the Dhamma. And it is at that point of contact that through recognize and be mindful of our thoughts, words, and deeds, that we're able to recognize a Dhamma practice where it needs adjustment, where we're doing pretty well. And it's just that simple. It's such a profound way of living in the world and looking at ourselves in a realistic way, not in a way that I got to find out what's broken with me, what's wrong with me, all the terrible things that have happened to me, and just take a good look at your behavior right here, right now, without analysis, without trying to figure out where it came from or who's to blame for it, whether it's you or someone else or the world or the president or the left or the right or what happened in New Zealand or all the rest of the stuff. That's all rooted in fabrication. How do I develop a calm and peaceful mind no matter what's occurring? The talk that I gave on Thursday night, I can't remember the name of the Vaga, but it was on self-care. It's another one of these suttas where the Buddha's true compassion for other people comes out, because this is a section from the Dhammapada, 1 chapter, where the Buddha devotes to telling people that are listening to him, developing his Dhamma, that the most important thing is to take care of yourself first. An interesting teaching from a person known for his selflessness, isn't it? But the Buddha understood that for him, even in his own understanding, that for him to be truly selfless, he had to first awaken and abandon selfishness. And then he was able to live that 45 years of a most remarkable life, selfless. But he had to take care of himself. That's why you hear me say so often, the first thing we need to do to establish a true and useful Dhamma practice is to be very gentle with ourselves, to stop judging ourselves harshly. Andrew.
Do you equate I-making and selfishness as the same thing? I'm trying to make a distinction between I-making, which isn't, my way of thinking, necessarily bad, because that's what I want to do. This, I want to study Buddhism. I want to travel this place. That's all part of I-making. Is it not?
Yeah, it's a great question, Andrew. It all depends on what's framing your desire. There's a Pali word called chanda, chanda, which actually means skillful desire. And so all desire isn't bad. The skillful desire to integrate and practice the Dhamma is obviously not I-making or even selfish. The paradox is that we have to do it ourselves. And until we have an understanding, this is where it becomes confusing to some people, especially those that believe the Buddha taught annihilation, that there's no such thing as a self. Well, what is it that has a desire to awaken? That's a question that Buddha would say, it's the question itself that's distracting you. Let go of the question. Because you're looking for, and I know this might seem like I'm getting a little bit beyond what your question is, but you're looking at what would be the underlying motivating factor for me to engage in the Dhamma, when even that question is rooted in the fabrication. What's to be recognized is I need to develop the Dhamma and not get into those questions about self-identification or not. A well-integrated Dhamma practice develops a way of looking at the world in a realistic way that does not include any self-referential views. And so how does that work out? Well, all that I need to do is to develop this practice. I do not have to be the world's best meditator, the world's most perfect right speech person, the one who has the most profound knowledge of right view or any of that. All that I need to look at is to develop this Eightfold Path. And I know that if I'm doing that, I'm doing everything I can as far as a Buddha is concerned for awakening. I'm making will often come in, and it's really the problem with modern Buddhism, by wanting this practice to be more or different than it is. Meaning meditation in the Eightfold Path isn't enough for me. I need to incorporate 2 hours of chanting a day. Or that would be, again, it sounds like a reasonable, it's nice to chant, et cetera, but that would be an example of eye making, because you're taking something that is complete and pure, and you're attaching something that you want it to be, which is really the underlying problem. It started in the Second Buddhist Council and continues today. Groups want it to be different than it is. So lose the confusion of the apparent paradox of who is practicing, because that thought itself is a fabrication, and simply take to the Dhamma. And I would bet that's an unsatisfactory answer, isn't it? Yeah, it is. But the question arising of who is it that's seeking enlightenment then, or seeking awakening, is answered directly by the Buddha in many suttas, but most directly in the Dhatu Sutta, where the Buddha says that person who's seeking enlightenment is the same as every other person, and is made up of 6 properties: earth, fire, wind, water, space, and consciousness. So that person is what's seeking enlightenment. Does that help?
Well, it'd be useful if you, with all of your experience, could actually write it down, all of the about eye making, if you haven't already done so.
I probably have somewhere. That's a good. You're right though.
So I guess,
But-
I'm sorry, I'm like interrupting.
No, you're not.
Say your question again.
Well, it's about eye making, and who is it really? I think if I can paraphrase it, who is it that's doing the Dhamma? Who is it that's developing the Dhamma? If I'm not supposed to have any desire.
Is that what your question?
Well, yeah, I was trying to. Some of the conversation inferred that being desirous of something is an attempt to become whole and making one an eye.
Right, okay.
But that's just part of inquiry and experience and learning, whether it's to be able to say that, yes, I'm a Republican, or I am a communist, or I'm a Buddhist. It's just that I want to know about it without making references to a title.
Yep.
Right.
And so, I mean, people ask me a lot of times, well, what kind of Buddhist are you? Like I have to declare I'm a Tibetan, and I said I'm the kind of Buddhist that practices what the Buddha teaches, and I don't mean to be flippant. That's the best description I can give. But I don't. The difference would be that if, again, it gets to very subtle levels of even intention and the underlying thinking behind it. I cannot be free of eye making even in the desire to awaken. But what I can do is work within the framework of the Eightfold Path, so that eye making doesn't overcome and distract my Dhamma practice. So again, it might be a disappointing answer, but until you've developed the Eightfold Path, there'll be a certain measure of self-reference in everything you do, but that's not a hindrance to the Dhamma. Mm-hmm. And so all that the Buddha is asking us all, I mean, it's everything, is to recognize and abandon self-referential views that are rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. How do we know what those are? Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. But when there's stress, when we're feeling agitation in one way or another, we know that we're engaged in eye making. But even that action could be, sometimes people get stressed out sitting on a cushion. I've gotten calls from people. I don't think I'm meditating right. Mm-hmm. Well, and so what do? Rather than try and analyze the eye making in that, where does it come from? Recognize I'm thinking. Not I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking. I'm supposed to be meditating. Come back to the sensation of breathing.
Yeah, yeah.
And every time you do that, whether it's on your cushion or off, you're diminishing that compulsive thinking that always established a self in every thought, word, and idea that occurs. You're interrupting that process and you're coming back to your body. So again, a long answer to that important question. How do you do it? You do it within the framework of the Eightfold Path. And even that question has an underlying tone of doubt, doesn't it? One of the hindrances. What do you do? Again, come back to the sensation of breathing. And eventually all that self-referential I-making falls away, and you get to the point where, as the Buddha says, there's nothing left to provoke further ignorance. You've let go of all of that, those self-referential views that will lead to doubt like that. And it's just a matter of continuing.
Yeah.
And we'll get into this a little bit more with next week with right effort. Right effort is a way of maintaining refined mindfulness in all of our affairs and all the thoughts, words, and deeds of our lives. It's a very important question. Thank you. That's my page. Let me just read those again. The trainings in heightened virtue, concentration, and wisdom establish persistence, steadfastness, absorption in jhana, refined mindfulness, and wise restraint. These three trainings should be practiced consistently and in all situations with unlimited concentration. These are the three trainings that brings pure understanding. Developing these three trainings, you will be called a rightly self-awakened one who has completed the path. The cessation of ignorance of Four Noble Truths and craving for self-satisfaction extinguishes the fires of passion. Extinguishes the fires of passion. That's the end of the sutta. And that's in reference to the many suttas, but the Loka Sutta, where the Buddha talks about when he first awakened and he looked out on the world and he said, the world is a flame with what? A flame with the fires of passion. It's self-identification, the constant compulsive need to establish the self in every thought, word, and idea that occurs to me. That creates that kind of stress and that passion for self-establishment rather than the passion for awakening. And let go of all those self-referential thoughts, words, and ideas that are so clearly expressed they're so easily recognized when we're mindful of those virtuous factors of the Eightfold Path. Any questions about this sutta before we go around the room? Okay, Jen, good to see you.
Good to see you. So I feel like it's really important to keep going back to kind of ego and the Four Noble Truths, and how ego is sort of the reason why we're stressed out. And so the Eightfold Path is always about recognizing and abandoning ego and sort of reducing it to just an aspect of our mind and our thinking when we are off the cushion.
Yep, that's right. An awakened human being's thought process is simply then a reference,
right,
to what's occurring, and that's a very subtle distraction. What is it referencing? In other words, a mind rooted in ignorance can only conceive of something referencing in reference to itself, rather than simply being present with life as life occurs. That's, again, it's a subtle, but it's the entire difference. It's really what Andrew was getting at too. That, the kind of the new agey Zen-y type questions of, well, who is it that's awakening, is a question that Buddha would say, it's that question that's causing you the distraction. Let go of the question. Every time a self-referential ego self, a mind rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths, insists on having an answer to every question it can come up with. That's how it continues its own ignorance, isn't it? If this can't satisfy this answer, it can't be any good. That's what the Mahasanghika said at the Second Buddhist Council. This Dhamma, the Buddha's Dhamma, doesn't provide for all the answers in the universe. Where do I come from? Where am I going? How long do I live? Can I live to 1,000,000 years old? Et cetera, et cetera. What's behind Pluto? The Dhamma can't answer that. It must not be complete. We need something else. Well, it doesn't matter to my well-being what's on the other side of Pluto, does it? In fact, it doesn't matter to my well-being right here, right now in this human life to know where I'm going from or where I came from. Look at the questions of Vacchagotta. What's most important for me to live in this world? To live in this world.
So yeah, so then when you're dealing with the these are the virtuous factors, right? Speaks, action,
Yep.
those are virtuous. It's always coming back to speech that's not gonna encourage ego in me
Yes.
or in somebody else. Action that's not gonna perpetuate it or bring it out in someone else.
Yep.
And then ongoing choices in life, like big picture aspects of like designing your life in a way that you're also gonna reduce.
That's right. And that's a very profound level of right speech that you're talking about and right action. In fact, thank you for bringing it up because it really needs to be talked about a little bit. Right speech is harmless speech. It's necessary, meaning that what I'm saying is actually going to be useful for a situation. It's free of gossip. That's a big one for a lot of people. It really simply means that we don't talk about people unless they're standing in front of us. And I'm not talking about, you're talking to your sister and you're talking about another sister. That's as long as it's not gossip.
It charges you.
Because
charges other people.
Gossip is about putting someone below you. It's completely rooted in self-reference, isn't it? And that's the type of God. I'm not saying, I saw your your brother the other day. He was looking good. That's not what we're talking about. Again, too extreme. That it's actually helpful, that you have enough wisdom to decide within yourself if what I'm saying is going to be helpful towards someone. If it's not, if it's only meant to deride someone or maybe correct someone's political stance, keep your mouth shut because you're bringing peace and harmony in the world. Nobody really cares or should care about my opinion. And again, I'm not talking about in the right context, but in general, it's harmless speech. It's free of gossip. It's necessary and it's helpful. The same thing with our actions and the same thing with our livelihood. There's some more rules that the Buddha would even include in those, such as not taking life in a callous manner. The Buddha never taught strict vegetarianism, for one thing, because it's unreasonable. It's not something that it doesn't fit into real worldly conditions. But he taught a highly moral and highly ethical way of remaining harmless to ourselves and others. And another aspect of that right speech is a speech we tell ourselves, but also what we're inspiring in the world. And if we're inspiring hatred in our speech, no matter how right we think we are, and maybe even how right we are in relation to a subject, it's still hate. And it's hurtful speech. It's something that we should learn to recognize and abandon. Again, the Buddha always taught the most important aspect of right speech is to teach the Dhamma authentically and clearly. And he says that over and over again. Becky.
So where the concentration, the real value of the concentration comes in is to be able to know sort of in a moment let's just use right speech as an example. Whether or not that speech is coming from a skillful right intention. versus coming from your ego.
Mhm.
And it's the concentration that allows you to know that in a sort of right away, in an instant, or at the
Yep.
moment.
Yep.
And that's why the concentration is so important.
Yeah, it can't be.
You can't do it otherwise.
You can't practice restraint without concentration, and that's the essence of the Dhamma, isn't it? To know where and how to actually restrain my thoughts, words, and deeds that are rooted in ignorance. That's where we begin and end Dhamma practice, is right there.
And to go back to Andrew's question, I've had that same question a lot. You know, is it I making because I enjoy doing certain things and I want to
Nope.
continue to do them, but it's that that concentration that it's really what is your intention.
Everything comes back to that.
It's what okay.
Yeah, to right intention.
The right intention.
And the right intention, in a general way, is the intention to recognize and abandon craving and clinging. And craving and clinging is rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. So again, it brings us right back to the point of the Dhamma, to recognize and abandon ignorance of Four Noble Truths, which, of course, will change my behavior, what I think and say to myself and others. It's where you see it, it's where you recognize it, it's where you know if you got a little more work to do. But it's also where you recognize that it is working, that you are developing the Dhamma as it's intended.
Or if you say, I want to do this thing, and then you recognize that it's I making, at least you have like more context to be able to
and you
continue to do it or not.
Yeah, you could choose to not do it, or you might choose to say, "What the heck? I'm gonna do it anyway." And but at least it's a conscious, even if there's some mindlessness there. At least you're aware of what you're doing,
You're aware of your mind.
which means you. Anthony DeMello wrote a great book. I don't know if it was a great book. It impressed me. But the line that it's called Awakening. No, it's called Awareness. And he said that awareness isn't the power to change, but it's the ability to change. And that's true. And the Eightfold Path gives us the proper awareness to know what we need to change and what we need to develop further. And it gets to questions like that. That common question that you asked, Andrew, is asked so many times in slightly different ways. And at the root of it is, what's going to happen to me when I let go of all self-referential views? It feels like annihilation. It feels like there'll be nothing left of you. It feels like which means that your view of yourself is what you're using to define yourself. But it's just a view, isn't it? And we know that it's a fabricated view because it's not based on reality. So why do we cling so tenaciously to these views that are fabricated? Because we made it. I made this, and I'm not likely to give up this too easily. But when I understand and I have a proper framework for recognizing the fleeting nature and the troublesome nature of my thoughts rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths, I'll more easily move through it. I'm going to say I'll happily let go of them, but there's some things that we struggle with. But in the end, we gained awakening. We gained a peaceful and calm mind. What a great discussion. Good to see you.
The Buddha's asking us to look at our mind both on the cushion and off the cushion. On the cushion, you can more clearly see that you're concentrated, you're thinking about your breath, you're feeling your breath and arising and passing away motion. And then a thought comes in and you recognize it and you come back to the breath. And hopefully you get that nice rhythmic rising and passing away. That applies to life as well.
Yeah.
I struggle with you just take right speech for example. I struggle with I think probably every time I open my mouth am I making. I don't think there's any time where I'm not I making when I open my mouth and talk. But maybe that's just when I'm concentrated that I recognize that I'm I making. Maybe I'm not always I making every time I open my mouth and talk. Maybe it's just sometimes. You see where I'm going with this?
Yes, and that's why
You just don't know your own mind.
that's
I
why
mean,
it's
you
important to begin to recognize what's occurring. It doesn't mean you're going to get it all at once.
So, yeah, to be honest, I'm kind of skeptical. You know, I know that's not wrong to be skeptical about the whole teaching. You know, we're kind of encouraged to be questioning about it. I do hold that sort of question thing is always at the back of there. I don't just take this like it's all black and white, and this I can't help but sort of question. And whether I sort of spend more time questioning the Buddha's teaching, the Dhamma, which gives me more stress, I don't know. You go round and round sometimes.
Yeah, it's easy for me to say, don't do that. Don't question it. Just do it. You know, put your head down and just do it. But that's not realistic either. Again, that's why all those things that you're talking about, as you continue to deepen, and I think you'd be the first person to say you've had great benefit from incorporating this into your life. The goal at times seems like it's out of reach, I guess is a way of putting it. But the important thing is simply to just continue. And that's part of it. When we refer to, and we'll talk about this at the end of this training, the 5 hindrances. Part of that doubt, or even sometimes feeling overwhelmed by it, is simply to be recognized, and you continue. We want the solution. Oh, I shouldn't have any doubt, and if I have doubt, it means I should stop what I'm doing. Well, you know, here's an awakened human being teaching you to no, you know, you don't have to give in to that type of self-referential thinking, and you can continue anyway. Thank you. Let me get to Mary. Hi, Mary. Let me.
Hi, John. Can you hear me?
I can. How are you?
Good. How are you? And how is everybody?
How is everybody?
We're all good.
Hello. Good morning. I'm enjoying the wisdom of listening to everyone else, and this is very timely and useful, as is every teaching. And for that, I'm just going to be in noble silence today. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mary. I'm glad you joined us.
Thank you.
Anthony, good to see you.
Good morning. I really appreciated the part of your talk that talked about being present, because it's so important. Like if you're able to not get caught up in what you think, what you said or what you did or what you want to say or what you want to do, and you could just focus on being present, I think you start to see things pop, whether it's nature or other people. You could really start to see good in everything and love.
Yeah.
And you get out of your own head and you stop worrying about things as much. When you marry that with taking to the cushion and developing the insight through meditation, it also becomes an inspirational wellspring where
that's a good way to put it.
decisions start to be, you can start to make important decisions, and you can, and things make sense about where you want to go, where your career wants to go. That stillness that you get from meditation brings a lot of insight. So I appreciated that. Last night I was watching the Mr. Rogers movie, Won't You Be My Neighbor? And it was amazing to see, and it made me think that his success with children was just being fully present.
Yeah.
He could just drop in, and you saw like he would connect with them so much that they all got up and started kissing him. They all one by one just went and kissed him on the cheek. And then when he was on TV, it almost kind of reminded me of Santa Claus. I can't remember who the person was from the 1970s. He was he had long hair. He was one of the talk show hosts. And And he said, come on, you're not really like this. And he just was approaching him with so much love that by the end of it, he had a hand puppet on his hand, and the TV show host was going goo goo gaga over the hand puppet. So I realized that it's the ability that he had was just to be present,
Yeah.
and to live his life, like you said.
He
It's
was
so
pretty
magical.
self-effacing too. If I
It's
remember.
so easy, but it's so hard.
Yeah. Who played him?
No, it was him. It
Oh.
was
It's a
almost like a
documentary?
documentary
Yeah.
movie
Really? Wow. Where'd you see it?
on HBO. It's a wonderful movie. And the other thing he did was, I didn't realize, is he would have the kids drop into stillness.
Wow.
Could you imagine that?
I don't know if he was a meditator.
And they never talked about that. But he was
He
a minister.
might not have back then. Well, yeah, especially if he was a minister. He might
Do you
not,
call
yeah.
it dropping into stillness?
No, he would just say, he would set the clock and say, let's just sit here for a minute and notice.
Wow. Thank you, Anthony. Andrew, good to see you.
That's been a great conversation. I have nothing to add now.
But I hope you found it helpful. It is the key a key question and a key conundrum and seeming paradox too. But the kind of the telling point about the whole thing is, if I'm worried about losing myself, it's kind of a self-referential view, isn't it?
Well, one thing does come to mind. I was watching a nature show, and the survival of the fittest is what has determined our world the way it is now over the millennia. But each one who has dominated, each plant or animal, whatever it was, I mean, they were exercising I-making, being superior over the others. Where reptile bites into another one to dominate that brood and be able to mate. But it's just ingrained in the course of nature.
Well, that struggle is also described in the First Noble Truth and the Buddha's description there too. That struggle to survive is part of dukkha. It's part of having a human life. It doesn't justify it or elevate it. It's just that's just the way it is, you know. So there's no the understanding in that scenario is just to recognize suffering. How do I extricate myself from adding to that suffering that's inherent in having a human life by stop taking things personal? By when the alligator gets my dog, I understand it's just part of life. It's part of what living in the world is, and living in Louisiana. It's none of that is to be taken personal. It's just it's an understanding of this is the way life is. Mm-hmm. But the Buddha didn't teach this he didn't teach a Dhamma of interconnectedness or interbeing or interdependence, which would say, well, we should learn everything we can about the world by simply observing nature. That's not what he said, because then we could come to that conclusion and it'd be easy. This is why people have taken on doctrines of saying it's up to the survival of the fittest, which gives me the right to do anything I need to do to continue to establish and elevate myself, including act like a gorilla and kill other people because it's seen in nature, isn't it? That can't be a justification for how I think and live my life. And the difference is that as human beings, and this isn't a right or wrong question, as human beings, we have the ability to develop profound wisdom. I don't know if other animals can. I don't think they can. But so as far as I'm concerned, and I find myself as a human being, what I'd like to do is to also develop an understanding of the world and myself. Gain understanding into three marks of existence. As opposed to, even if it's in a subtle way, to justify I-making, such as I have a right to survive. Because usually that right to survive goes beyond what the Buddha said. And the Buddha didn't say we don't need anything. He said every human being needs four things: food, shelter, medicine, and clothing. We all do. And so it's in the pursuit of taking care of ourselves, practicing restraint that is important at that point too. There's things that we have to do just to live in the world. But that's not I making, it's just practical. You know?
Mhm.
So again, and one of the reasons why I run these classes the way I do is because it's by the questions that we come up with that I understand people are getting the Dhamma. And by your questions, you're understanding the profound ramifications of where this is going and what happens to me when I let go of all self-referential views. You're awakened. You're, as the Buddha would say, you're a sage at peace. So, thank you. Lisa, I believe you have a question for us all too.
Okay, so Jay and John and I are going to head over to Frenchtown Fresh, the vegan restaurant, after the class. If anyone's available and wants to go over and check it out, that'd be great.
Yeah. Does everybody know where it is?
Where Polk was.
What is that, like for breakfast or lunch or brunch?
I've never been there.
They have breakfast, they have lunch, they have anything, anytime.
It's sort of in that little corner.
They have
Back in the corner.
breakfast type things, lunch type things,
Sounds
mix
good.
and match, whatever you want. It's pretty good.
It's new.
If not, check it out anytime. It's just a fun place. And I guess the seating is just one big table too, so that's kind of nice.
Yeah.
What's the name of it again?
Frenchtown Fresh.
Frenchtown Fresh. Okay.
So nothing has been laughed at, parodied more than Mr. Rogers. Why?
I was thinking, as Andrew was talking, I was thinking just that. So I'll let you continue. I think
I would like to see that documentary. The pace of the show was, I guess you would consider it slow, and deliberate and gentle, considerate. I think some adults liked it, some kids liked it, didn't appeal to everybody, but whoever said it, his attention was 100% on right then, and his attention was on the children and being there, and just to be. So, and I tend to live I'd like to live in a slower pace than most people. And I find the fast pace of our culture is really too much for me. So I guess I joke that not only I'm in the breakdown lane, I'm on the shoulder. And I can't, I speak slower, I process things slower. I just don't get things as fast. And it just seems like Buddhism and the whole idea of it is really is very meaningful to me. And so and for me, it's just the journey. I don't have to get anywhere. I would just like to be more peaceful in my life. And I still say, stupid things, thoughtless things, and angry things, but maybe I'm more aware of them.
Yeah, that's so important.
And I try to be more considerate, but considerate, with the meaning of you're considerate of someone. So I would like that, but also to consider things, to have time to think about them. And the quietness of Buddhism gives me space to think.
Yeah, thank you. And it gives us the framework to think properly too. You know, it's not, again, it's not just thinking, it's how to think about these things. So we got to get going. Matt's going to be here soon. Jay, good to see you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, we've been all over the place today, and I've had thoughts regarding just about every place we stopped. And, you know, if you take the whole metaphor, we're on a path. The people in this room are seekers of wisdom. They're people, you know, who are thinking people. And the way we approach things is different than many other people. I think that one of the things that got my attention, the things we talked about today, is I think you can participate in things as long as you don't become obsessed by them. You know, you can realize certain truths and, you know, okay, I got this kind of figured out, I'll put it in the box and I may need it later or whatever, you know, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think cosmic speculation, if that's what you're interested in, or trying to figure out why do butterfly fish have the extra eyes, who put them there, how they got there, all that stuff. You can compartmentalize that stuff. I don't think there's anything wrong with having a roving mind or an inquiring mind as to your how you feel about things or your state of mind. Being at peace is a wonderful thing, but you know, there's times you'll be at peace, and there's times when you will participate in things which are not necessarily peaceful.
That's right. Thank you. Mary, good to see you.
Good to be here. You know, the takeaway from this lesson for me is to try to be present with life as it occurs, although I frequently try to push things away because they're unpleasant.
Yeah. And that's just a conditioned response to life, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just the way it is. And this allows us to be present for those things that we want to push away too.
And I realize that when I am present for them, that fighting them is not helpful.
Yeah, it's never
Yeah.
is. Never is. Thank you. Becky, good to see you.
Good to be here. I just want to say it's been a great discussion. I've really enjoyed it, learned a lot. And thank you.
Good. Thank you. We got to kind of move it along a little bit. So just a real quick announcement. Some of you got an email regarding the retreat and about possibly changing the dates. And it's still up in the air. I'll let everyone know. As of right now, the dates are still the same, but I'll let everyone know by the middle of the week whether we are going to change the dates to June. Becky, if you could get back to me, yes or no, on if it's possible for you to change the dates, that would help. But I gotta make a decision this week, and we'll see. The decision might be out of my hands, but
June 13th. No, June 13th, 14th, something like that.
yeah,
You gotta look at your calendar.
just about one
No,
month.
it's not good.
Is it?
I'm remembering right now because we have a thing on the 12th.
Okay, we're good. I'll send another. I don't think we're going to change the dates then. The Buddha's words on metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. So again, take a moment to find your relaxed meditation posture. And take a moment to become mindful of your in-breath and your out-breath. And this is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with the boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class this morning. Peace.
Thank you, Joe.
Isn't that
That's here, yeah.